One thing I want to point out first is that the brain has two hemispheres. So there's it's going to be mirror image, but for us, that's the left side and that's the right hemisphere. And before we dive into the different regions, I do want to mention that there's this thing called crossing over that happens in the brain, which is where one hemisphere of the brain, so say the right side, as information travels to and from the body, it actually crosses over and goes to the other side. So that's where you end up with the right side of the brain is controlling and responsible for the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere of the brain is controlling and is responsible for the right side of the body. And so just bear that in mind as we talk through things. We're going to just focus on one side, but it's a mirror image across the brain.
Now, the brain, while we're about to break it down into different areas, we make it sound like there's, in your brain, there might be represented by different colors. Like blue is frontal, green parietal, pink occipital. But this is, in the end, brains are all just pink mush. There can be little anatomical ways of breaking them up, called, with sulcus and gyrus. I think gyri, yeah. So there is ways of breaking them up when you look at it, but to the untrained eye, brains are just a mess of pink blob. So while we have given these things names and areas or lobes, they technically, when you're looking at a brain, you will have no way of looking at it, being able to say, oh yeah, this is where this part ends and this is where that part starts, unless you have very specific experience and know a lot of neuroanatomy and you've looked at a lot of brains. Now, the brain is exceptionally complex. We're going to do our best to make it understandable today. So for those who have a lot of neurological knowledge, which we've got a couple of people listening just because this is their field they work in, some things might not be completely technically accurate today in terms of a neuroanatomy level. It's because we want to make this understandable to everybody.
Yeah. So we are simplifying a lot here, but a lot of this information we're going to be talking about does come from things like functional fMRI scans or functional magnetic resonance imaging. So they can see what activity is happening in the brain when different inputs and outputs are being given to someone. And so while we're going to talk like everything is clear cut, that's not how it really works in practice. It's just, on average, these certain areas are sort of more associated with different kinds of activity. So just bear that in mind as we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So many of these areas cross over information all the time.
All talking.
All talking at once is a good way to think about it. This is just a way of categorizing it to make understanding each area and the impacts that it causes down, further down the track, make a little bit more sense.
Yep. So with that in mind, let's get into sort of the 5 main areas that are associated with different activities and patterns across the brain. We're going to generally be talking about the outside, so the way that's compartmentalized on the outside of the brain, which is the cortex. And there are sort of 5 distinct regions that are associated with different patterns. I think the first one to start with is the frontal lobe. So that's this bit up the front here. If you imagine that's the front, sitting in my head like this. So the frontal lobe is the section of your brain right at the front here. And it's essentially responsible for your intention, your planning. It's where a lot of your personality sort of sits as well, your sense of self and who you think you are. And so if I decide to, say, punch Sam, for example, if he's annoyed me on the day or for whatever reason, then that intention to initiate a motor movement comes from the frontal lobe. Also, speech production, so my intention to say all these words, that's all being first generated in an area called the Broca's area on the frontal lobe as well. Interesting note on the speech production, Broca's area, for most people, sits on the left side of the frontal lobe, not on the right side. And it's generally associated with handedness. So people who are right-hand dominant, which is the majority of the population, I forgot the exact number, but tend to be having the Broca's area on the left side of their frontal lobe, and so it crosses over as well into the right side of the body.
Yeah, I like that punching analogy.
Yes.
We'll run that through the whole time. Because essentially a good way to think about it is Kenzo's initiated his movement to do it.
Yep.
It's also come from the aggressive side of Kenzo that doesn't really exist, but will exist today.
Good example anyway.
I've annoyed him enough. So that little bit of aggro in his personality that's fueled him on was also, located within the frontal lobe. And him yelling at me, you've done it today, Sam. You've pushed my buttons just too many times. Also, managed to come from the frontal lobe too.
All frontal lobe. Yeah.
So that brings us into the temporal lobe next.
Mm.
So your temples, typically people know where they're located. Around the ears, let's say. Coming from here is where we kind of get the meaning from sound, so we get a bit more sound processing.
Mm.
We get some memory, and we get some emotion.
Mm.
So it plays a crucial role in a few different things, but obviously you can kind of tell that getting sound and understanding what someone is saying to be able to then process that and use that information typically comes from around the temporal lobe. Now, again, if we are going to use the punching example again, Kenzo's yelled at me. I can see the aggression in his face, but I can hear the change in his tone. I know that's not my friendly Kenzo that sits next to me all the time. That's Kenzo who's meaning harm to me. Essentially, I've been able to process that coming through my temporal lobe.
Yep. Quickly, we'll mention too that sort of almost primal instinct section of your brain that's responsible for processing fear, having that initial threat detection. That's all in a deeper section of the brain called the limbic system. So it houses like the amygdala, which is responsible for that fear response, and hippocampus, which is involved in things like memory and emotion. They're deep in the brain, but they are associated with that temporal lobe area. They're sort of in that region, but deeper in. And so that's why they're associated there. Yeah.
Now, same as the frontal lobe had the Broca's area, the temporal has what is called the Wernicke's area. So same thing, typically just located on the left side. And this is essentially where we're getting most of that processing going on for speech.
It's like understanding what someone's saying.
Yeah.
So it's good to have in mind that speech production and comprehension worked on by different parts of the brain. Yeah.
But again, communicating with each other. This is whereas we wish we could say it was easy as one does one, but there's so much information that gets relayed from even different parts of the brain that makes it all work as one fluid thing.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
The brain.
Yeah.
Speaking of all it being interconnected, next up we have the parietal lobes. That sort of sits on top. So you can see on camera here, while the temporal was here, just above it in this area here, that's the parietal. So it sits on top of the brain. And it's responsible for your lived sensory experience of the world. So we call the somatosensory cortex. So that means your senses of the world. So your sense of touch, your hearing gets sent from the temporal to the parietal. Vision, which we'll get to in a little bit, eventually gets sent to the parietal lobe as well. And it sort of pulls it all together and gives you your sensory experience. So we're constantly taking in all this different sensory information, and your brain needs to put that into context. That's all happening up in the sensory cortex there.
Another big part here is proprioception. So again, you can probably, do you want to explain? You have a great analogy for proprioception.
So proprioception
is first.
I like to call it our secret sixth sense. We have actually many, many more than the classic 5 senses or whatever it is that we say we have. I think it's in the tens to hundreds, depending on how you want to differentiate it. But proprioception is a big one, and it's called our sense of position in space. So if I close my eyes and I try and touch my nose, I can do that without any visual input and without any really tactile input from my nose or from my finger. My brain just knows where my arm is in space and where my nose is in space and how to bring them together. And the way that works is our joints, our tendons inside our body all have like little receptors that sense how stretched they are, what position they're in, puts it all together, all happening up here. And so it knows like the angles of each limb, every little bit of your body in space, which is really quite amazing.
So when you're throwing this big right hook at me, essentially I could get you to hold your fist here, close your eyes, and then you can probably still know relatively if you're going to land it smack bang on my jaw over here.
Yeah, I can roughly envision where Sam was, and I know my hand's up here. Like if Sam moves my hand in a different direction, like I can feel without looking that went to the right. And so that's all happening behind the scenes through the proprioception processing in the parietal lobe.
So that brings us onto the occipital lobe next.
So that's at the back of your head here, or at the back of Mr. Pinky.
This is for our vision mainly. Because because vision is such an important sense, like the brain representation of how big this area is massive, like compared to like some of the other areas. So, and as you can imagine, it's really important. It's our way of understanding our environment. Of course, the other senses are very important, but vision arguably is how we maintain most of our lives.
Gets a whole lobe to itself.
Yes,
especially
a whole lobe.
humans, where we rely quite a lot on vision. Yeah.
Now, it tells us lots of different things, like because again, it gets the meaning of these things as well. Things like shape, color, like how far away things are, and like being able to tie those things in all together. So, and again, typically all comes through the big, strong optic nerve, so it's relatively quick as well.
And it just seems kind of counterintuitive that our eyes are at the front of our body and the occipital lobe for vision processing is at the back. Just quirk of anatomy, the way it works. So the nerves do come out this way, go to the eyes, but then the information gets sent up through the brain, which we'll get to in a little bit, to that occipital lobe for processing.
Another bit here before we leave is the amazing thing that we can do of track a moving target. So again, occipital lobe, relatively automatically, we can just naturally just follow something with our eyes. And even though our eyes don't smoothly move over, they typically just jump between things.
Yes.
They keep everything, what should be like a segmented like jump, because our eyes just go dut, 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 dut. They don't actually track smoothly. It automatically just makes it into one beautiful, smooth, movie-like presentation in our brain.
It's amazing.
Which is truly amazing.
Yeah. Like for example, if I look from Sam to if I keep my head still, look from Sam to the camera, what I perceive is that I get a smooth transition over, but actually it's a very abrupt movement. But yeah, our brain's just always smoothing that out.
Yeah.
I know there are those glasses that you can get these funny glasses on the internet as well, where they basically flip your vision to upside down. And at first, obviously, it feels very off-putting, but I've heard if you leave them on for something like half an hour, eventually your brain kind of adjusts and can start to see right way up again.
Might have to do an experiment. We'll get 2 pairs and we'll do a whole episode with us.
We'll get a bit confused.
Sinking all over the place.
But yeah, all that happening in the occipital lobe.
Yes. So again, coming back to the punch, I can see it coming. I can see how quickly Kenzo is going for my jaw. I'll know where he is and if I can step back out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. Another quick fun fact. So coming back to the crossing over idea, vision's a little bit different. It's very interesting in the way it works. So you might think that it still happens. So you might assume that right side of the brain is responsible for left eye. It's not quite the case. The way it works is down to visual fields. And so if I close my right eye, I still see this big visual field, but if I separate in half to the left and the right halves, that's my left visual field and my right visual field of my left eye. And so same happens with the right eye. And what happens is the right hemisphere of the occipital lobe is responsible for processing the left visual field of both eyes and vice versa. So it's sort of that 2 halves of both eyes get sent to one side, the other 2 halves get sent to the other eye. It's quite interesting.
And very hard to remember.
Very hard to remember, yeah. There are little diagrams that we might pop in the description as well if you'd like to get an input.
I just remember learning about it in uni, like all the amount of circles and like crossing over that goes on. Oh my goodness, it is a nightmare to keep up with.
Yeah.
But it gives us the amazing capacity to perceive depth and know how far away something is by, our amazing binocular vision.
Yeah.
Having 2 eyes that are coming from different angles that cross over, then allow us to know how far away something is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing.
The brain does a lot of funky things all behind the scenes without us thinking
that most people never even think to appreciate.
Yep. Yeah. Not until something happens.
So that brings us on to the cerebellum next.
So if you imagine, this is the 5th kind of lobe of the brain. It's not on Mr. Pinky here. He's lacking a cerebellum. But if you imagine my fist is the cerebellum, it just sits underneath the occipital lobe like that. So the frontal lobe's at the front, occipital lobe just sits at the back, and then the cerebellum is underneath it. And it sort of looks like that. It's about that size too. It looks a bit different to the brain. So it has a different, all this sort of curled in sort of, how would you describe it?
Pink goop.
Pink goop brain shape, yeah, with all the waves and little crinkles. That's all the main cerebrum. The cerebellum sort of has more lines in its appearance. It's just, which is quite interesting, but it's very distinct if you see a picture of the brain.
So here comes movement accuracy and error correction. So smooth movement is something truly amazing, and we don't have to think about it. But sometimes processing things can take a long time. So we need some things to happen quite quickly. So some error where the cerebellum comes into play an important role in correcting these things as we go. So for example, we'll use the punch example again. So Kenzo's coming towards me. I'm trying to wiggle out of the way.
So I've got to adjust course.
Kenzo can adjust course, like for other systems to work would be too slow. So it kind of gives an immediate change to try and keep things going, to be able to achieve the intended purpose of whatever the action was.
Exactly. Like if this signal for me, if like my frontal lobes generated this signal, like I got to punch Sam, it's very important. And halfway through, if he dodges, I'm not aware of this change in course. My brain I'm not deciding like I've seen Sam move to the right and I need to follow it, like in Sherlock Holmes when he goes into that like bullet time mode. It's not like that. It's all very automatic. And so that's the cerebellum in action. Yeah. Another example I like to give is if you walking down the street and you're not thinking like, I'm putting one step in front of the other. It's all just an automated movement. You're doing that. You're thinking I'm going to get to that shop down the street, got to get my morning coffee, and then your toe catches and you start to fall. You catch yourself, and then after you've caught yourself, you're like, oh, I almost fell. But all that error correction to get you back to being stable happened sort of without your awareness. That's magic of the cerebellum.
And doing it accurately as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
We're saying that a lot. A lot of the brain is really amazing. And so those are the 5 major lobes of the brain. There are a lot of deeper structures as well. So sometimes it gets called like the midbrain, or there's all these different regions that we won't touch on too much here. But we did talk about the limbic system, which is the one for including the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are sort of underneath the parietal lobe in there. Another big important piece is something called the thalamus. So it is basically like the control or relay center. Relay center is better one, like a switchboard for the brain. And so all the sensory signals that are coming from your body need to go up through that thalamus first, and then it decides this signal needs to go to this lobe, this region of the brain, often to multiple at once, and it's relaying all the information between different parts of the brain. So it's like the relay center. Yeah.
And it's working all the time.
Yes.
Like it's not like it kind of gets to pick and choose. There is like sensory information, even just sitting still doing nothing. It's just flooding information to different parts of the brain and like sending it to where it needs to go.
Yeah, and like gating it from places it doesn't need to go.
Yeah.
If it allowed everything and constantly, we'd be sort of overwhelmed. There'd be way too much sensory experience going on. So it needs to decide this goes here, this goes there, and at the appropriate time.
So next is then the basal ganglia. Now, this essentially is helping to kind of like get movement initiated and stop movement. So it's kind of like gating for like on and off, on and off. So it does this through some neurotransmitters. I think we're going to dive into the basal ganglia by itself in a whole episode because it's important to very particular conditions. So we won't dive into it too much today.
Yep.
But again, just functions to try and get movement started, stop it when we don't need it, and keep it all smooth along the way.
So for example, like if the frontal lobe decides to launch a punch, the basal ganglia then decides whether that actually gets initiated or not. Yeah.
And then also if Kenzo tries to stop halfway, there's the initiation of the on-off of the movement.
Yeah. And then down the very bottom of the brain, again, not here, connecting to the spinal cord is the brain stem. And it's really important for just autonomic functions. It's like the most, to use a bit of a buzzword, it's like the most primal part of the brain. And so it's doing everything that's completely outside your control. So like your breathing without being aware of it, your heart rate, and all those sort of like basic life functions are all happening from the brainstem, or being controlled by the brainstem.
Hey everyone, just quickly, could you please double check you've hit that subscribe button? Because it is the best way of supporting the show.
And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit that bell icon as well, so YouTube will notify you when we have our new episodes out every week.